Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. So this year is the 70th anniversary of Showcase number 4, and so this is the first appearance of Barry Allen, the Flash, from 1956. Now, it is not the first appearance of the Flash, because that would be this book here, Flash Comics number 1, that introduced us to Jay Garrick, the original Golden Age Flash. So this is when they brought the character back in the 50s, and this issue is one that people debate about whether or not this is the beginning of the Silver Age. I think there is a case to be made for that with this book, but that's not up to me. So I want to take a look at this issue today. Unfortunately, I don't have the original version of this book because that is a very pricey comic book, but I do have this Silver Age Classics reprint that DC did back in, I think it's around 1992 this is from. There is supposed to be a facsimile edition coming from DC. I'm not sure why it's not out yet. We are past the official date of the anniversary. It's also a 70-year-old book, so I'm not sure why it's late. You know, they published it back in the 50s. You think it would be easy enough to reprint it now. But this is a close reprint book. Again, it doesn't have the original ads like a modern facsimile. As we can see, we've got ads from the early 90s here, but the stories inside are intact here. So we're starting off with the first story, Mystery of the Human Thunderbolt. And so this was written by Robert Kanigher with art by Carmine Infantino, and I believe the inks are credited to Joe Kubert on this. Our story starts out here with this big splash page where Flash is literally coming out of the pages of a comic book. We cut to a scene at a radar station where the military is picking up some strange object traveling faster than anything known. This will play into the story later on, but it says here we turn back the clock and we see police scientist Barry Allen reading a Flash comic book. So he is reading a comic book about Jay Garrick, the original Flash from the 40s. So that was kind of how they treated this originally, where the Jay Garrick Flash wasn't a pre-existing superhero, but there were comic book stories of him in this universe. Of course, later they would change that when they crossed over. And then we get the famous origin, where Barry is working in his lab and lightning comes through the window and strikes the cabinet of chemicals, throwing them all over him. Later, Barry is trying to catch a cab and ends up running past it. So this is our first indication of super speed with him. And at this point, he's not even really sure what's going on or if he imagined, and he thinks he's just stressed out, and that didn't really happen. Barry goes into a diner, and the waitress spills a tray of food, and then Barry quickly grabs it all before it hits the floor and hands it back to her. Again, he still thinks he's seeing things at this point and that he just is tired and needs to get some sleep. Now it's the next morning and Barry is going to meet Iris West. Again, right from the beginning, we've got Iris in the story. This is Barry's, eventual wife, longtime love interest in the book here. Iris sees Barry and asks, "You're always late. Why are you so slow?" So right here from the first appearance, we're getting the trope of Barry being late for everything. Again, the fastest man alive is always slow in his real life. Barry thinks he's seeing something impossible again, where now a bullet is headed for Iris's head. He lunges at her and knocks her out of the way at the last second. A police officer approaches them and said that was a stray bullet made by the Turtle Man that he fired while making his getaway. Barry thinks to himself that Turtle Man is the criminal called the slowest man on Earth. So here we're setting up the Turtle, again another Flash villain, and as a counterpoint to the Flash being the fastest man on Earth, the Turtle Man is the slowest. Back in his lab, Barry realizes that he has developed super speed, and he is the fastest man on Earth. So taking inspiration from the comics of the Jay Garrick Flash, he decides to use his powers to help humanity. So here at the bottom of the page, we get what will eventually be a classic trope of him opening the ring and then his suit expanding from within. Barry then proceeds to run down the side of the building and out onto the street. He breaks the sound barrier here, and that is what is picked up by the radar station. So that's what happened at the beginning of the story here. This is what the military detected. And again, this is, day one Flash. This is the first thing he does. He runs out on the street, breaks the sound barrier, and is detected by the military. That doesn't really play into the story here. I don't know if that ever comes up again from this instance. It would be interesting to see how that would play out, though, with, the military seeking him out or coming after him or something like that. Barry runs into a bank that's being held up, and everything is still in the vault, so he's not really sure what's going on. Barry thinks he sees the Turtle Man in the alley here and rushes towards it. Turns out it's just a painted silhouette. So he got kind of roadrunnered here by the Turtle Man and crashes into the wall while the Turtle Man comes out of the sewers here. Barry chases the Turtle Man through the sewers and comes out into a river where there's a boat waiting. Barry grabs it and attempts to chase the Turtle Man with it. This is an interesting moment, seeing Barry use something that's, just sort of laying around in his pursuit. And right after, we get the now famous running across water. So yeah, we probably won't see Barry use a boat again after this is established, where the Flash is fast enough to run on water. Now, as he is chasing the Turtle Man, though, he is actually pushing his boat forward. So the momentum of Flash's running is pushing the Turtle Man away from him. So to counter this, Barry just starts spinning around in a whirlwind around the Turtle Man. Barry captures the Turtle Man and takes him into custody. Here he is interviewed by some of the press, who says, "You certainly captured that character in a flash, mister. What did you say your name was?" Barry replies, "You just said it, the Flash." So now I'm not sure if they're implying that this reporter named Barry, or if Barry is taking his name from Jay Garrick and the comic books. It would seem like he would be taking his name from the comic books. Maybe this is just serendipitous with the reporter using that word in the question. Later, Barry and Iris are going down the street and they're selling newspapers with a story about the Flash. Iris comments, "It would be exciting to meet a man like that, but it's probably just an idle dream." And Barry remarks that sometimes dreams come true. So that's our introduction to the Flash. Again, we get, a pretty quick origin. Again, this is half of the comic. So, if this were made today, this would probably be a 6-part storyline where maybe he didn't get into the suit to the last issue kind of thing. But this is kind of everything you need to know. They, go back to the Golden Age Flash as a comic book, as like an inspiration for Barry. I'm not crazy about the Turtle Man as a villain. And again, he's definitely not one of the Flash's biggest rogues. I can appreciate the idea of the world's fastest man versus the world's slowest man, but I don't think it really works out well here. I think it's really a stretch the way they play it here. I think Jeff Johns and some other writers did it better, decades later, really. Thematically, there is sort of like a poetic rivalry there, but I don't think it really plays out too well here. And again, Flash catches him pretty quickly, considering. That's the first story. And we already have the second appearance of the Flash here, too, in the story, The Man Who Broke the Time Barrier. And I think this story is credited to John Broome, but again, because we have story by John Broome here. And then we have Carmine Infantino and Joe Kubert on art. So here we have a splash page of this villain shooting heat rings at the Flash, and the Flash just kind of diving through them here. Our story starts out with different items being stolen from around town. We've got a guy's shaver disappearing. A TV repairman gets a tube taken out of his hand. Barry has a beaker being stolen from his lab. So just things are kind of mysteriously disappearing around town. Barry notices a foot of someone running away. And we get another scene here of the costume expanding from the ring and Barry chasing after this guy. Our villain almost looks like Lex Luthor here. It's not, but I'm surprised they went with a design that looks so close, especially with the purple and green. I don't know if Lex was wearing that yet, though, at this point, but looking back, you really kind of see that. Here we get the scene from the splash page where these rings of heat are being shot at the Flash, and he's dodging them. He creates a whirlwind here that sends the rings off into the sky. So here our villain has escaped to the edge of town, and we get some backstory on him. So we find out the villain's name is Mazden, and he was a criminal from the future who was sentenced to go to the 50th century because it is desolate, and that is to be his prison. So instead of sending him forward in time, though, they sent him back. So there was some accident, and so he comes back to the present of, 1956. So here we see a graphic of the rocket he's in being sent back. And so we have these calendar pages here, and the first one we have is the year 3000. It's left vague as to what time period this guy is from, but if it does start off in 3000, that would put him around the time of the Legion of Superheroes. So I don't think that's what they're implying here, but that could be something fun to kind of play with later on. So the scheme is basically Mazden has come to the present day and is kind of stealing these seemingly ubiquitous objects that he's going to use to repair his rocket and go back to the future. So Barry overhears a police report about someone using a weapon that shoots rings of heat. Barry, realizes that's Marsden and chases after him. Again, here we have him diving through the rings, tackling Marsden and taking him into custody. What the cops don't realize is that he has a contact lens that can sort of like focus light. And so he basically uses it as a magnifying glass to burn his way out of the bars. And so he steals his equipment and escapes police custody. And Barry, as the Flash, chases after him. Oh, the fun way that Barry tracks him, too, is he's able to move fast enough that he still sees like a heat trail for where he went. So I guess this is sort of like an infrared sort of thing that the Flash is using to trail Marsden here. So Barry catches up to Marsden. In between panels, Marsden kind of lays everything out for him, but he says to him here, "So you see, it's to your interest to let me return to my own age. I'll never come back to bother you or your civilization again." What he means by that is I'm not 100% sure, because Marsden is a thief who was exiled to another time. So it doesn't seem like he presents any real danger other than just like being from the future and maybe understanding a more advanced technology. But this guy is just a thief. He's not a war criminal or something. They never really talk about the extent of his crimes in the future and what he did that would warrant this kind of punishment. In theory, yeah, the Flash wouldn't want a criminal just running around, but they never explain why Marsden is so dangerous that he can't be left in the present day of 1956. Again, you think he would want to stick around just to continue robbing and being in a time period where he would have the advantage. Flash looks at his rocket, though, and says, "Your takeoff would result in a great blast." And Marsden says, "Yes, it will blast out a crater at least 10 miles in diameter." If he takes off in this rocket, he's going to destroy the city, basically. Marsden said, "It's only a few thousand people. It's not that important." So Flash is like, "No, we're going to get you back to the future without the time capsule." And so here we have a scene that will become pretty familiar to Flash fans over the years, is Barry grabs Marsden. They go to the racetrack and they just start running. So basically Flash is just running fast enough to go into the future. So he hits kind of a bump here, and so this is the time barrier that the title is referring to. And so they do break through it. That's what this crack here is. And so Flash takes Marsden back to the authorities in the future. Again, we're not told specifically what year this is or what time period, but they say, hey, we're going to throw him in another time capsule and make sure he goes to the future in which he belongs. It seems weird that they would be dumping off their criminals into the future. It's just like a wrecked planet, maybe, is the idea. It still feels like he's going to be on Earth, though. So does something happen to Earth in the future that makes it a wasteland? That's not really explained here at all, but that is where Marsden, is supposed to go. Flash runs back to the present, and then later on in his police lab, his buddy here says, Barry, weeks have gone by, and not another case of those strange robberies. And Barry replies, I guess the thief was caught and is serving time somewhere. Yeah, then we have some ads for some of the DC Archive editions from back then, and we get some essays here by Julie Schwartz and different writers about the Flash and different things from back then. So yeah, it's interesting, the second story, we get a time travel story featuring the Flash. Again, something that would become kind of standard for quite a while with different Flash stories. But it's interesting to see it here on, day one of the character. If you're not aware, this return of the Flash was something instigated by Julie Schwartz, the editor of DC at the time. And the idea was basically just to take the name and sort of like the power and make like a new character. So we did have, the Jay Garrick Flash from back in the day. But as you can see, he doesn't resemble Barry at all really here. It's a different guy. It's a different suit. The idea was to do a more scientific explanation of his powers. And, we would get flashbacks over the course of the book, trying to be more scientific with what they're doing in this. And, we're talking about sort of like the atomic age and sci-fi and different things going on too. So really making Flash more of like a sci-fi kind of book here. This is a really strong start. We get two good stories here at the Flash. I'm surprised we haven't seen Marsden come back. I've checked. It looks like he's come back a couple times, but in pretty small stories. He never became like a recurring villain or anything like that. I think it is interesting, this sort of wasteland that he's been exiled to. You know, what happened there? What happened to the Earth, maybe, that led to that? Or were they sending him to another planet? You know, it's kind of unclear here. And again, you can kind of see what they were trying to do with the Turtle Man. I don't think it's that successful yet. Again, you know, I think other writers would handle that character better in the future. But yeah, I think this is a really good start to The Flash. If I'd grade it, I'd probably have to give it a near mint just because of what it led to. You know, this issue on its own is fine. I think due to the historic significance of this book, they have to bump it up a little bit. And because, you know, they are good stories. I wish they were a little longer, but again, that might just be reading it through, you know, modern eyes. There is supposed to be a facsimile edition of this on the way. This story has been reprinted a lot. You know, I've got the Silver Age Classics here. I know there was a Millennium edition back in the day. I know it's in this book here, The Flash Omnibus Volume 1. It is available to read on the DC Universe Infinite app. So yeah, it's not a hard one to find if you want to check it out. And I think it is worth reading just for the historical significance, if nothing else. But it is a good story, and I, you know, am a fan of The Flash. So this is where it starts with Barry. Have you read this? What do you think of this introduction of Barry Allen Flash? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching. If you'd like to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter/X at Detective651, also on Instagram at Detective651. Be sure to check out my t-shirt store at tpublic.com/user/Detective651. I've got a lot of nerdy designs on there, and there's sales all the time, so check it out frequently.